Hey, so I recently had a pretty interesting conversation on shroomery.org in the philosophy section. So we were talking about the link between creativity or like genius and madness and stuff like that. And somehow, well, actually, I made it veer off into a conversation about like OCD and stuff. But I'll basically explain what I said. I basically told them a story about back in my childhood around I was I think it started when I was 8, so in grade 3. I I was playing at recess with one of my friends, and we were playing this game where we had sound effects, or we were making the sound effects to it. It was I forget which game it was. It doesn't really matter, but we were making this sort of beeping noise. Um, and I didn't think much of it. We were doing it a lot, and then once recess was over, we were going back to class, and then I had this thought in my head. It said, "What if I never stopped making this noise?" And then throughout the when I got back in, I started to make the noise a little longer, sort of like in a whisper to myself, and then I had this weird sort of switch in my head that it felt like there was this phantom scratchiness in my throat that it wasn't actually there. It was just imagined. Like I thought, like I just sort of felt something was there. I felt like there was something in my throat that I needed to clear. So I would make this beeping noise, and for some reason my brain would associate that with clearing the phantom sort of scratchiness in my throat. So I would end up clearing my throat a lot and making that beeping noise. Like by clearing my throat, I mean like going like like, yeah, when you swallow wrong and then you have to like get your throat back to normal. It always felt like somehow I swallowed wrong, and I need to make that noise all the time. And when I do swallow wrong, like that's when I would make the noise like pretty consistently. So I was I started to basically make the noise every day, and then in school, my teacher was trying to discipline me for it because she thought that I was just trying to disrupt the class, and so I got in trouble, and then my mom had to come in and basically say like, no, there's a problem with him. He has, there's something not right. So I went to my family doctor, and then he diagnosed me saying that I had Tourette's syndrome. So this was when I was eight. So it took around probably around like 2 years for me to sort of get you know work through the habit and sort of figure out what's going on in my brain and why is this happening, because it was obviously embarrassing that I would make this noise every day in class and stuff like that, and everyone in my school just had to like deal with it or whatever. But I noticed that when I would go out to like recess and play and stuff, it it would it wouldn't be as noticeable, or like I wouldn't do it. It was like if my mind was occupied with uh, heavy activity, then I wouldn't make the noise. It was only when I went into school and had to work on stuff that I would start making the noise, because then I would have um, time to sort of think about it. So fast forward to when I was about 12, I developed like the type of OCD that's intrusive thoughts, and I was diagnosed by I think it's a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist. I can't remember, but I had to go to the hospital, and I received cognitive behavioral therapy. So that ended up not being successful when I was 12, but I think I learned a lot. Like they taught me about like or maybe I read about it. I'm not sure, because I was reading a lot about like how to sort of work out of the OCD. Like I had the checking one, but it wasn't as bad as my intrusive thoughts. So I would just get all of these what if statements coming into my head, like what if I harmed my family for no reason, or what if anything that would cause me anxiety, it would say what if. And then anytime I would try to rationalize why those thoughts were false and not true, the more of a stranglehold it had on me. So like that was called like feeding compulsions. And the reason I sort of bring these up is because I've noticed that the same sort of mental pathway, or the same sort of mental process that was happening with the Tourette's thing was the same with OCD. It was a what if statement that you basically fed with performing the ritual. Like performing a compulsion is called performing the ritual. So anytime you try to relieve the anxiety by performing the habit, the more of a connection it creates in your brain. Like it strengthens the connections because it's firing in that specific pattern. So the trick is to break the pattern. So you're not supposed to feed the compulsions. When you have a fear, like a what if statement, you're supposed to just let it sort of pass freely through your mind, instead of having a sticky mind and sort of attaching to it, like gripping onto it. So I learned the process on getting rid of the tics and the Tourette's type symptoms I had was the same process on how to stop myself from dwelling on these intrusive thoughts. So I explained this this story to the Shroomery forum, and one of the there's a member that I'd mentioned before that talks about a lot of very complex topics. Like a lot of it is like over my head. Like I don't have the language or the knowledge yet to understand exactly what he's saying. Like a lot of it is neurobiology and like advanced sort of psychology concepts. But basically, when I posted, my comparison, saying I thought that the pathways between Tourette syndrome and OCD were very similar, he said, "I think that is a great analysis, so let it be OCD. But how is OCD actually different from an energetic mind?" And then he said another thing that I thought was really interesting. Like, this is the kind of language he uses, so I don't really expect anyone to sort of understand it. I have trouble understanding it too. Like I had to research like Gestalt principles, and like that's just like the very basics of what he's trying to get at. So he says, actively pursuing associated mental formations by the most energetically charged linkages will give looping thoughts and cycles of feeling which give a trapped sense or a sense of being in a ever deepening rut. So by trying to think oneself out of a rut, one gets deeper into it. In this way, the attachment linkage between mental forms leads to suffering, OCD. So I compared that to the whole thing about feeding compulsions, but it's more complicated than that. Like I have to understand the specific parts of what he was saying more. Like it's more complicated than what I was trying to reduce it to. But he said that I understood it for the most part. So I thought that was like an interesting thing to share. Like it's not often that you have someone who sort of experiences these things and can sort of be very introspective on the mechanisms behind it, and I think that could be very valuable than just trying to figure out what these things are without actually having them or talking to someone who experiences it. But I personally think that OCD might be just, I think Tourette syndrome might just be OCD, or like a manifestation of it. That's the whole basis of this video.
Subscribe.